Okay, so for our first presentation, we have Julie and Cole DeLille from the Kahnawake Environment Protection Office, and they will be presenting the Tekakwitha Island and Bay Restoration Project, and you can start when you'd like.
Okay, let me try and share my screen here. Can everyone see this okay?
I can see it, yeah.
Yep, okay. So let me get started here. First, I'd like to say thank you everyone for joining us today. And I'd like to thank the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne for hosting a virtual World Wetlands Week. I'm really looking forward to a lot of the presentations this week and for learning a lot. So my name is Julie DeLille. I'm the Environmental Education Liaison for the Kahnawake Environment Protection Office, or KEPO for short. And I'll be sharing with you the first half of this presentation today. And the second half will be presented by my colleague and my lovely brother, Cole DeLille, who is our Environmental Projects Coordinator. And so today we'll be sharing with you some updates on a current environmental restoration project in Kahnawake, which is called the Tekakwitha Island and Bay Restoration Project. So first, let me see if this works here. Okay, there we go. So first, just a quick overview of what we'll be discussing today. So some of the who, where, what, and why. First, we'll go through a bit about our organization, so you have a bit of background on what we do. We'll go through the history of the bay. And I want to show you first in this picture here that you can see this is the bay that I'll be talking about, this water here. On this other side, the far side, that's the Tekakwitha Island that we'll be speaking about as well. So we'll go through the history of the bay, and then we'll talk about some changes that occurred in the bay. We'll talk about the goals of the restoration project, go through some of the project elements, such as the environmental measures that were taken and some of the different construction elements. And then we'll look at the current stage that we're in, and then we'll have some time to answer any questions you might have. Okay. So first, a bit about who we are. The Kahnawake Environment Protection Office, or KEPO for short, as I said. So our vision is based on Mohawk traditional values. It is to promote the protection, respect, and improvement of all aspects of the environment. Through increased resources, awareness, and community responsibility, we will succeed in the restoration and preservation of our Mother Earth for future generations. And our mission is to provide environmental leadership to the community and fulfilling our responsibilities as caretakers of Mother the Earth. So what we do, our areas of responsibility include wildlife and habitat studies, environmental protection, environmental monitoring. We do have a lot of community events and education activities. We do monitoring of contaminated sites, surface water monitoring, inspections, and environmental consultations as needed. So some of the photos here are just a few examples of some of the services that we offer. I think the first one at the top left is from one of the bird surveys that we had did. The next photo next to that is from the Montreal Climate March. You can see Cole there with Lynn Jacobs, the Director of Environment Protection, and Kalia Markry, who was our General Manager of Environmental Protection. The bottom right picture is a photo from a bat survey that we had did last year. And then we have Kenneth Canadian over here, who is our environmental technologist for KEPO. Okay, so first, I'd like to go through a bit of the history of the bay. It's sort of like a short story that I'd like to explain. It's a bit of a sad story that I'm sure a lot of people are already familiar with if you know the community of Kahnawake. It's a story that I hope we can show does have the opportunity to have a bit of a happier ending with this project that we're working on. So Kahnawake translates to the place on the rapids. So the community had a huge connection to the riverfront, the St. Lawrence River, which connects the Great Lakes to the Atlantic. It is right next to the community. We're located on the south shore of the river across from Montreal. And so at the time, the riverfront was the center of the community for many families. Our families swam there, they picked medicines there, they fished there. The men were really great fishermen. They were great navigators of the river and the rapids. And really, it was a gathering place for the community. The kids swam there. It was a huge part of the community. And you can see what the shoreline looked like. It was a natural shoreline. People were able to swim there. It was really beautiful from what I've heard from elders. But then what you'll see is that in the 1950s, a lot of that changed. So in the 1950s, the St. Lawrence Seaway was developed, and the Seaway was created by the government of Canada and the US, and it was a system of locks and canals and channels to create a better shipping channel in the river to bypass the rapids in certain areas. And so this was a $407 million project. And this project expropriated 1,262 acres of land from the community. And it really severed that connection to the river. You can see in these photos just how like distinct the cutoff from the community to the river was. And in the video here, you'll see an example of some of the, excuse me, some of the shipping vessels that pass through, how close they are to the shore and just how large they are. So we'll get hundreds of ships that pass through the Seaway in the summer. And so the community at the time had fought against this construction, but there were many lies that were told. There was a lot of coercion that happened, confusion. There were even forced evictions that happened to families that lived along the shoreline. And the Seaway officially opened in 1959. So this is a photo here before the Seaway was constructed. This is the natural shoreline that once existed. You can see that there are some natural islands that were once there. And so we can see a before and after of what the current shoreline looks like. You can see the wall from the construction of the Seaway. And you'll see the land to the right of the photo. That's still land from Kahnawake. It's called Flat Rocks now. It's still some of the natural shoreline next to the river. But what happens is community members have to leave the community and drive to neighboring community of St. Constant to access that territory by a bridge over there. So we lost that direct connection. And what you'll see here, where those natural islands were, all the material that was dug from the creation of the Seaway was dumped onto that area, and it created this artificial island, which is what we call Tekakwitha Island now. And in the area right where that small bridge is, if you can see, that connects Tekakwitha Island to the main land of Kahnawake, that area in there is what we're talking about when we say the Tekakwitha Bay. And so what happened here was really traumatic for a lot of community members. It changed whole ways of lives for a lot of community members, but it also really affected the environment in the area. It threw off that natural balance in the environment and the river. But our community adapted. So from the 1960s to now, a lot of community members tried to maintain traditional activities on the water. We still paddled, we still fished in the area. The Onage Paddling Club was established in 1972, and that's located at the end of the bay where that small bridge was. And the Onage Paddling Club has been great for community members of all different ages. And we were also given a town pool as compensation for the creation of the Seaway. That was located behind Onage Paddling Club, but unfortunately the community pool was closed in 2002. A lot of community members still swam in the Seaway and in the bay, but it was a lot more dangerous considering all the shipping vessels that were passing by now. But for many years, people were able to use the bay, and it was a great place to swim, to fish, and to paddle through. But over the years, there were a lot of changes that took place in the bay. So we can see some of them in this photo. What happened is after a few decades, the water in the bay began to change. There's low flow from the bay, the water moving out, it's really low flow. So a lot of sediment built up and a lot of aquatic plants began to grow there. And you can see in these photos, in certain areas, it was even impossible to navigate through. And the shoreline became really dangerous as well. This is a picture from underneath where the bridge connects Kahnawake to the Tekakwitha Island. And you can see some of the rocky shoreline. It's not ideal for swimming or for fishing in that area. And even a lot of the paddlers from Onage noticed that they weren't able to paddle around the bay anymore in the middle of the summer. They would have to paddle out into the Seaway now and turn around in the Seaway rather than paddling right through the bay, which isn't ideal considering the large shipping vessels that are passing through there. And a lot of people weren't fishing in there anymore either, because as you can see with a lot of this aquatic plant growth, you can't really fish in that. And for most months in the summer, this is what it currently looks like. And so over the years, the Environment Protection Office tried to figure out what was causing the situation in the bay. A lot of community members were asking and saying there's something that's changed, asking what could be done. So starting in 2008, they began doing studies of the bay and trying to figure out what caused the problems and how it could be remedied. So what you'll see in this photo is a picture of Kahnawake, and you'll see the seaway coming from St. Constant area and Chateauguay to the left. So if you look at the Chateauguay River, what was happening was that a lot of nutrient-rich water was flowing out, because upstream it's a lot of farmland in Chateauguay. So all that nutrient-rich water was flowing out into the St. Lawrence here, and it was flowing down into Kahnawake and into the bay. So you'll see even the discoloration of the water compared to into the river, and it becomes a little more brown, a little more cloudy closer to the shore. And what happens is it goes into the bay and it kind of settles in this one area where you can still see some of the natural shoreline from those islands that were there. So it settles in this area because of the low flow going out of the bay. It doesn't really carry out that sediment. So it builds up in one area, which is leading to the buildup of the aquatic plants, because it's really nutrient rich, causing a lot of plant growth. So I think here we'll hand it over to Cole so he can explain some of the goals of the restoration project, and he'll explain some of the work that has already been done in the last year and some of what we can look forward to in this coming year.
Great. So hi all. Some echo from you, Julie.
Sorry?
I'm getting some echo from you.
Oh, sorry, I'll try and switch off here. Oh.
All right. So Julie had introduced me earlier. I'm Cole DeLille. I'm the Environmental Projects Coordinator, and I've been involved in this project in the planning stages and in the field supervising the construction of the project. So like Julie was saying, with the construction of Tekakwitha Island, we had a number of problems. The island itself is created of the material from the bottom of the seaway, so it's this rocky riprap material. It's extremely hard soil, and it's not very conducive to life. So only like the hardiest plants can live there, poplars, shrubs, and of course invasive species, which can take over anywhere. So one of our goals for this project was to naturalize the island itself, to create some wetland zones on the island, and to give some more diversity. Like Julie was saying, the sediment as well. We wanted to improve the water flow in the bay so we don't have this increased sediment over the years, and we can use the bay again for recreation. So the paddlers can get through for fishing and swimming as well. In the photo earlier, there was also two natural wetland areas. One of these is located on the island itself, that you can see sort of right in the center of the image, and one on the mainland shore opposite to it. So these two wetlands, we wanted to enhance what's already there and protect them for the future. So now I'm just going to go over some of the project elements. We'll start with what we've completed this year, well, in 2020, and the work coming up for next year. So overall, here are some of the construction elements. We had a detailed design for this project completed in 2018, which gave us a number of recommendations for measures we could take to improve the island. We also conducted some community outreach, and this gave us a few suggestions for what they would like to see incorporate into it. So starting off with that, the beach. This was something that came out of our community consultations. There had been a few swimming areas in the community before. Just go back. And community members wanted to see these beaches restored. So we had to incorporate this somewhere into our project. So we chose right across from the Onagi Paddling Club, which is a nice open area where community members will have a beach in the future. Here we have Marsh and Linear Pond and the Turtle Nesting Zone. These are the two wetland zones that we'll be constructing on the island. Community enhancements includes fire pits, access points to get into the water and for fishing, a shoreline rehabilitation. Often along the shoreline here, it's very steep and rocky. And so the shoreline rehabilitation will ease some of those slopes, making it easier to access for community members and wildlife, especially turtles who have to crawl up the rocky walls. A storm sewer rehabilitation. So on the south side of the bay, there are a few storm sewers with large rocks on the sides. It looks very unnatural. So we're going to be trying to naturalize this a bit by removing some of those boulders and installing some wattle fences made of willows. And so these are going to be planted in the ground on the sides, and they're going to grow and hopefully hide the storm sewers and make it look more like a natural shoreline. The dredging and aquatic plant removal. So like I was saying earlier, to get through the bay, we're going to be doing to improve the flow, we're going to be doing some dredging in the center of the bay, and we're also going to be taking out a lot of the aquatic plants that grow along the bay center to Onage. And throughout this project, in all the zones we're going to be working in, we're going to be replanting. In total, we have a little over 20,000 plants we're going to be planting in the wetlands and along the shorelines. Before we began the project, we took some environmental measures to protect the wildlife and the habitats. So starting in March, we had some delays thanks to COVID. We started doing snake hibernacula surveys. So we put down shingles to locate where all the snakes could be potentially overwintering so we could protect these. And we were also going to be trying to find as many as we could because we would be installing exclusion fencing over the entire work areas. So with this exclusion fencing, we could keep wildlife out of the work areas to keep them safe. And if there are any that are in the work areas, like snakes, we could, as we're going about our day, take them out and protect them. So you can see in a picture, we have the Kay's brown snake here that we found during our survey. And we have a baby snapping turtle, which had hatched in the site itself. So I was, in 1 week, I think I removed 14 little baby snapping turtles, which had snuck in. But the fencing for us worked really well because in the early spring, we had all turtles going alongside the fencing, trying where they would normally go and lay their eggs, and trying to get more inland, but since it was a work area, it just wouldn't be safe for them. So they may do in some of the other natural wetland areas for the time being. We also installed turbidity curtains whenever we're going to be working near the water to protect the fish from the increase in sediment. We also did a bird survey to locate any nests in the area, and we delayed work in cutting any shrubs or trees that birds would be nesting to until it was clear of eggs. Another issue we found before we started construction was there was some invasive Phragmites in some of the areas that had previously went unaccounted for. So for those who don't know, Phragmites are extremely invasive, which could spread through their roots or their seeds and often grow in wetland areas. So these were growing in our Martian linear pond wetland. So all of these needed to be removed before we started. So before they went to seed, you can see in the picture on the bottom right, we cut all of them down and placed them in tarps to prevent them from going to seed. Then with all this plant material and the excavated soils going down roughly 2 to 3 meters. We dug a pit and we piled all of these Phragmites contaminated soil into it. From there, you can see the plywood. We sealed this pile off with plywood, and then we will be covering the plywood itself with some of the excavated riprap material. So this is just to prevent any of the invasive species from spreading further. So the first feature we've worked on was the community beach. You can see here, the design is facing Onage Bay. And so this was a feature, like I had said, that was community requested. We installed a stone line along the back. This was because, and the grass along the back. This is so the powwow in the summer, which uses the area, can still have some access. And we have now, in this point of the construction, we have our sand in and we have this sand spread. So hopefully in the next year, this area will be available for community members' use. The Marsh and Linear Pond, this is the first of the 2 wetland zones. This is where I had talked about we had done some Phragmites removal. So the goal of this is to create a large wetland with a pond running through the center. So you can see in the left-hand image that sort of wiggling pond. In there, we'll be planting some aquatic vegetation, and then we'll go up through different zones, like a wet meadow, a marsh, and a dry shrubland. And so in each of those zones, we're going to be planting native plant species, so it naturalizes this area. You can see in some of the images here, in the center, that the ground is really rocky and rough. So in order to plant these, we're going to be using the dredged soil from the bay itself. So we're going to be mixing what we dredge up with sand to create a more ideal planting medium. So this area of the project is still under construction. Excavations were going on I believe we finished in early December. So in the beginning of our next season, this will be continuing with the excavations, and hopefully we'll have all the planting completed by the fall. The turtle nesting zone, this is the second wetland area. The goal of this is to provide more habitat for the turtles. We have painted turtles and snapping turtles in the area. Currently, they're focused around the natural portion of the island that is left, but we wanted to provide them a bit more areas to access land and for nesting. So this involves creating a small beach area and making some nesting areas for them. So you can see in the sort of rendering we had there, the beach, and sort of further to the left of this, we have these rocky piles, which are snake hibernacula. And around those, there are sand piles as well that the turtles could nest in. So looking at the construction, we relocated the existing bike path, which had went through the area. That's on the top left. We made it go around the area, so it's going to have a nice outlook for community members biking by. On the top right, we have construction in progress. They're doing some of the shoreline work. And now on the middle left, we have what the shoreline looks like now compared to the previous shoreline. So we brought in this quite a bit, and we have a nice slope along there. And so hopefully next summer, or well, next spring, turtles will be already moving in to use the sand and for nesting. So community enhancements, I had mentioned, we're going to be building fire pits. We're going to be creating 5 fire pits throughout the island and the bay. And we're going to be also creating a number of community access points to get down to the water for fishing. So the fire pits themselves are going to have some benches around them, and they're going to have plantings around them as well. Plantings and natural vegetation, as same with the rest areas, which are benches and some garbage cans on the island. By our beach, there was also a sort of informal boat launch. So Since this was in the area, we moved the boat launches there and we constructed another boat launch, which is the bottom two images there, which since was one of the first items we completed, it already saw heavy use during the summer. So it seems like people are happy with it. So coming soon in the project, we have a number of items left to complete, and I'm just going to go through those now. The bay access points, here's a rendering those. So we have some nice flat stones we're going to be locating from our material we've already dug up, and just reusing those to create sort of this winding path that goes down to the bay for people to access the water with. We're also going to be doing some planting around these areas of natural vegetation and wildflowers to sort of improve the shoreline a bit. The shoreline rehabilitation, this was more improving the shoreline, clearing it of some of the invasive species, or maybe some of the more nuisance species like poison ivy around areas community members are going to be accessing the bay, and making the slopes a little more gradual for wildlife to get in and out of the water. Here is our storm sewer rehabilitation. So you can see around the sides of the storm sewer, those sort of wattle fences that are going to be there to help retain the walls, and that are going to eventually grow into willows themselves to naturalize the sides. We removed the large stone blocks which are on the sides, and some of it has been reused to create these settling ponds at the bottom. So right now, the storm sewers themselves actually contribute to sedimentation in the bay once there's a storm event. So these ponds will collect all that sediment, and then it'll be easier managed if we want to remove it from there rather than having it spread out into the entirety of the bay. The dredging and aquatic plant removal. So this was the aspect of the project we had started off with, which was the main goals of the project. So we wanted to dredge the material. So you can see in the center of the image, the orange area. This is the area we'll be dredging. It's a 10-meter wide channel that goes through this shoal area. This is where we have the most sediment deposition and where the sediment is like the thickest. So digging this channel, even though it's narrow, instead of digging the entirety of the bay, will increase the flow going through the bay enough to mitigate most of the sediment that would settle in the area. And along the green area, you can see to the right-hand side, and the red area is where we're going to be removing all of the aquatic plants so the paddlers can get through, and to improve the flow itself. So here, what the method we chose for the dredging is hydraulic dredging. So we will have a boat similar to something like this, which will suck up the sediment from the bottom of the bay, and then it's going to transport it inland with these floating pipes. Once transported inland, it'll be pumped into dewatering bags or a dewatering area. Then once it's dewatered, we'll have something like this dirt pile you see here. And this sort of sediment is going to be very nutrient rich because of all the aquatic plants and the sediment which comes from likely farming upstream. So this is going to be great for growing plants in. Once we mix this with soil for a bit more drainage, we're going to be using this in our wetland areas and along our shoreline plantings to have a much better planting medium. So this will give you an idea of what it might look like once we're finished our planting. This is our pollinator garden project we had been working on in the past. So we planted a large number of native species here and for pollinators. So we've been monitoring it for use by monarchs and bees. And so this is going to sort of be the same kind of mixture of plants that you'll see in the other areas, of course, with a lot more trees and that. And we're hoping to sort of give this feel to the entirety of the project. So the current status of the project, our turtle nesting ground is cleared of most of the elements. We have some topsoil placement and planting to go on this coming year. Invasive species have mostly been removed. We have to place topsoil and planting. Our marsh and linear pond, our mass excavations are mostly complete, and we have to finalize this for this coming year, and more topsoil and planting. Our beach has finished, aside from the planting, and our rest areas still need to be constructed for the most part. Some benches and garbage cans have been installed and fire pits, but most of this will be going on next year. So because of how the project was planned, all of our elements depend on the dredging and having that sediment. So this element hasn't taken place yet. So finishing all of these different elements relies on getting our dredging done next summer. So that's it for our presentation. Thank everyone for listening, and please let us know if you have any questions.
I have a question, actually.
Yep.
So that was a really good presentation, and I just have a question about your Phragmite results and stuff. Like, I know we have a lot of like Phragmites down here and a big problem with it. So I was just wondering, like, how is it doing? Like, how is your result or upkeep with it and stuff? Because it was a cool process on how you did it.
Yeah, this was a really intensive project for the removal. We had been recommended to put sort of a meter of material over the Phragmites with the plywood, but we went a little extra with the excavated material on top of it as well, just to ensure that nothing comes up. It's an expensive process, but I guess we'll see the results in the next year or so if this holds up. Well, for the excavations itself, we were finding that a lot of Phragmites, aside from what was on the surface, the rhizomes were going pretty far outside of the areas and under roads. So even though we had thought we had finished, as we were excavating, we were finding more and more and more root material. So that's sort of a concern for this as well, just if we miss anything, that they could come back.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
Well, if you have any questions, also I'll put back on how you can reach us if you do have any questions. We can, oh, it's hard to share screens on through Teams. Yeah, you can see more about the project on our website. It's kahnawakeenvironment.com. We're also on Facebook, Instagram at Kahnawake Environment. So we post a lot of updates there, a lot of photos and things while the project's ongoing. You can keep up with it. And our phone number, you can reach us at 450-635-0600. And our email at environment.protection@mck.ca if you have any other questions. So thank you. I don't know if anybody had anything else.
If there's no other questions, Yao for presenting, and that was a really awesome presentation. And the next presentation will be at 1 o'clock from the Remedial Action Plan done by River Institute and MCA Environment. Thank you.
Nyama.
Thanks.
Anna.
Ona.